I had just finished leading a successful pitch meeting when my dad asked me to stay behind. My mom stood by the door, arms crossed, looking like she was preparing for battle. Then came the words that shattered my world. "Rachel, you're no longer part of the company. We're going in a new direction." I thought it was some kind of cruel joke. We just landed a six-figure contract with our biggest client ever, and I'd been the one who secured it. But the cold expressions on their faces told me this wasn't a joke. They were dead serious. They handed my role to my cousin Drew, the same guy who once forgot our biggest client's name during a presentation and had to ask me to whisper it to him. As I packed my things into a cardboard box, no one said a word. Not even my dad, who'd taught me everything I knew about business. The office staff avoided eye contact, clearly uncomfortable with what they were witnessing. Just like that, 5 years of my life were erased. 5 years of 60-hour weeks, missed family dinners, and sacrificed relationships, all dismissed with a single conversation. Later that evening, I overheard my mom on the phone with my aunt. "Rachel's just not exciting enough to lead," she said, her voice carrying through the thin walls of our family home. "She's too plain, too predictable. Drew has that CEO vibe, you know? That natural charisma people follow." I stood frozen in the hallway, feeling like I was 12 years old again, listening to my parents discuss my shortcomings with relatives. It was the same conversation I'd heard my entire life, how I wasn't as outgoing as my cousins, wasn't as charming as other kids, wasn't enough of anything to matter. "Drew brings excitement to the room," Mom continued. "Rachel just manages things. That's not leadership." The words cut deeper than I expected. After everything I'd accomplished, all the late nights fixing Drew's mistakes, all the clients I'd saved with my boring attention to detail, they still saw me as the unremarkable daughter who couldn't measure up. I was 28 years old, and I felt like that overlooked child all over again. The silence that followed was deafening. No calls asking how I was doing. No check-ins from former colleagues. No messages from my parents wondering if I'd found other work. Just complete, crushing silence. I sat on my apartment floor for 3 days straight, staring at my resume and trying to figure out how to explain working at my own family's company and getting fired by them. How do you tell potential employers that your own parents didn't think you were good enough? Every line on my resume felt like a lie now. Led strategic initiatives, apparently not well enough. Increased client retention by 40%. Apparently that didn't matter. Managed cross-functional teams. Apparently Drew could do it better despite never having managed anything more complex than his fantasy football league. I started applying for jobs, each cover letter a humiliating exercise in pretending my family's rejection wasn't a massive red flag to other employers. The worst part was the shame. I felt like I'd failed not just professionally, but personally, in the most fundamental way possible. Only one person called me that week. Grandma. She was 83 years old and had more sense than the rest of my family combined. "Rachel, honey," she said, her voice steady and sure, "they're going to regret this. You're the brains of that place, not Drew. You always have been. Just wait." She told me stories about my grandfather, who'd built the business from nothing in his garage 40 years ago. He had vision, she said, but more importantly, he had integrity. He never would have treated family like this. "Your parents forgot what really matters in business, competence and character." Grandma had worked alongside my grandfather for 30 years before retiring, and she understood the company better than anyone. "Drew's going to run that place into the ground," she predicted. "And when he does, they'll come crawling back to you. But you make sure you're in a position of strength when that happens." Her confidence in me was the first validation I'd felt since the firing, and it planted a seed of hope I didn't know I desperately needed. 3 weeks later, salvation arrived in an unexpected form. I received an email from Tom Jeffries at Jeffries Logistics, one of our former clients. "Hi Rachel," it read. "I heard you're no longer with Evans Consulting. Are you available for freelance work? You were the only one who ever answered our emails on time, and frankly, the only one who understood our business model. We have a project that's perfect for your skills." I stared at the email for 10 minutes, hardly believing it was real. Tom was offering me contract work worth more than I'd made in a month at my family's company. He'd specifically sought me out, not the company me. For the first time since my firing, I felt a spark of excitement instead of crushing despair. Maybe Grandma was right. Maybe I did have value beyond what my parents could see. This email wasn't just a job opportunity, it was proof that my work had mattered to someone, that my skills were recognized and appreciated by people who actually paid attention to results rather than charisma. I took the job, and it changed everything. Tom paid me $2,000 for 3 hours of work, consulting on supply chain optimization. It felt like I'd been surviving on scraps my entire career, and suddenly I had a seat at a table I'd built myself. The work was challenging and engaging in ways my family business had never been. Tom treated me like an expert, asking for my opinions and implementing my recommendations without question. During our follow-up call, he said something that stuck with me. "You know, Rachel, working with you is like working with someone who actually cares about getting things right." That's rarer than you'd think in this industry. After years of having my contributions overlooked or credited to others, being recognized for my expertise felt revolutionary. I realized that my family's dismissal said more about them than it did about me. There was a whole world of clients out there who valued competence over charisma, and I was finally ready to find them. I didn't tell anyone about my new venture. Not Grandma, not friends, not even my neighbor who'd been asking how I was holding up. I worked out of my tiny kitchen, building systems and processes that I'd never been allowed to implement at the family business. I hired a virtual assistant, created project management workflows, and started developing the kind of efficient operation I'd always envisioned. It felt like building my own secret empire, one client at a time. Working for myself was terrifying, but also incredibly liberating. I could make decisions quickly, communicate directly with clients, and deliver results without having to navigate family politics or explain myself to people who'd already decided I wasn't worth listening to. Within a month, I had 3 regular clients and was earning more than my family had ever paid me. The irony wasn't lost on me. Away from their guidance and limitations, I was finally performing at the level I'd always known I was capable of. My little kitchen operation was running circles around the company that had deemed me inadequate. News of Drew's performance started trickling back to me through former colleagues who'd kept my number. Drew just lost the Davies account. My old coworker Marcus texted me. Total disaster. Showed up to their quarterly review without any of the reports you used to prepare. They were furious. I couldn't lie, I smiled a little. The Davies account had been one of my success stories, a mid-sized manufacturing company that I'd helped streamline their operations and save $40,000 annually. Drew had inherited a perfectly maintained relationship and somehow managed to destroy it in less than 2 months. Other updates followed, missed deadlines, confused clients, and a growing reputation for unprofessionalism that was starting to damage the company's standing in our industry. My parents had traded competence for charisma, and they were learning the hard way that charm doesn't close deals or retain clients. I felt a mixture of vindication and genuine sadness, watching the business my grandfather built start to crumble under Drew's leadership. I registered my LLC on a sunny Tuesday morning, officially becoming the CEO of my own company. I named it Airline Solutions, a reference to moving forward with precision and purpose. Creating a logo, setting up a business bank account, and filing the paperwork felt like the most empowering thing I'd ever done. This wasn't just a freelance gig anymore. This was my company, my vision, my rules. I could build the kind of workplace I'd always wanted to be part of, one that valued results over politics and competence over connections. That evening, I celebrated alone with takeout Chinese food and a bottle of wine, toasting to my future and the freedom I'd never known I was missing. For 28 years, I'd been trying to fit into other people's expectations of who I should be. Now, finally, I was building something that reflected who I actually was. The relief was overwhelming. I wasn't the failed daughter or the overlooked employee anymore. I was an entrepreneur, and for the first time in my life, that felt exactly right. 3 months after my firing, Mom called me one evening. Hi, honey. Just checking in, she said in that fake cheerful voice she used when she wanted something. You know, family is family. We miss having you around. She never called just to chat. Never. In 28 years, every phone call from Mom had an agenda, usually involving something I could do for her or some criticism disguised as concern. I asked, is everything okay at the company? There was a pause, then she said, oh, you know, just some growing pains. Drew's learning the ropes. These things take time. Growing pains. That was one way to describe losing major clients and missing deadlines. I kept my voice neutral, not wanting to reveal how much I knew about Drew's failures. I'm sure he'll figure it out, I said diplomatically. He's very charismatic. Mom missed the subtle sarcasm completely. Exactly. He just needs time to develop his technical skills. The important thing is he has that natural leadership presence. I wanted to ask if natural leadership presence could restore their damaged reputation or bring back their lost revenue, but I held my tongue. I posted my first client win on LinkedIn, grateful to support growing businesses through strategic operations consulting. Exciting to see real results from collaborative problem solving. It was a simple post, professional and understated, but it represented a milestone I was proud of. Within an hour, my dad had viewed my profile. Then Drew. Then my mom. None of them liked the post or sent messages, but I could practically feel their panic through the screen. The post generated more engagement than I'd expected, former colleagues congratulating me, potential clients reaching out, and industry contacts offering to connect me with opportunities. It was the first time I'd publicly claimed my professional identity separate from the family business, and the response was overwhelmingly positive. My phone buzzed with LinkedIn notifications throughout the day, each one a small validation that I was building something meaningful. If you're enjoying this story of family betrayal and professional triumph, please hit that subscribe button and the notification bell, because the best revenge is still coming. Meanwhile, my family's silence spoke volumes about their growing concern. A week later, I received an unexpected email from Helen Martinez, the accountant who'd worked with my family's business for 15 years. Rachel, she wrote, I hope you don't mind me reaching out, but I need to talk to someone off the record. Things aren't looking good over there, and I thought you should know what's happening. We met for coffee the next day, and Helen's news was worse than I'd imagined. Drew had mismanaged invoicing, lost track of client payments, and failed to maintain the financial systems I'd spent years developing. They're 3 months behind on their books, Helen confided. I've been trying to help Drew understand the processes you created, but he doesn't seem interested in learning. He keeps saying accounting is boring and that's what staff is for. The irony was painful. My boring attention to detail had kept the company financially healthy for years, and now its absence was threatening their survival. Helen looked genuinely worried. I've been working with small businesses for 20 years, and I've seen this pattern before. Companies that lose their operational backbone don't usually recover. She wasn't trying to hurt my feelings. She was stating a professional reality that my parents had been too proud to acknowledge. The next morning, I found an email from Mom in my inbox. The subject line read, "Help us understand what you're doing." The message was brief, but loaded with subtext. Rachel, we've noticed you're doing consulting work in our industry. We'd like to understand your business model and make sure there aren't any conflicts of interest. Perhaps we could meet for lunch to discuss this. Translation: You're becoming a threat, and we need to control the situation before it gets worse. I read the email 3 times, marveling at the audacity. They'd kicked me out of the family business, left me to figure out my career on my own, and now they wanted to monitor my success to ensure it didn't interfere with their interests. The same people who'd declared me unfit for leadership were now concerned enough about my leadership to demand an explanation. I crafted a polite but firm response. Thanks for reaching out. My business focuses on operational consulting for small and mid-sized companies. I'm confident there are no conflicts of interest. Hope Drew is settling in well. I didn't agree to lunch. I didn't need their permission to succeed, and I certainly didn't owe them an explanation for building something they'd forced me to create. When I visited Grandma the following weekend, she greeted me with a mischievous smile and a new coffee mug that read "Boss Lady" in bold letters. Thought it suited you better than family disappointment, she said with a wink, handing me coffee in my new mug. We sat on her porch, and she told me stories about the early days of the company, when my grandfather was struggling to keep the business afloat and she was managing the books while raising 3 children. Your grandfather always said the best business decisions come from necessity, not comfort, she reflected. You kids today had it too easy, too comfortable. Getting kicked out was the best thing that could have happened to you. Grandma had a way of cutting straight to the truth that both comforted and challenged me. Your parents made a mistake, she continued, but their mistake became your opportunity. Now you get to show them what real leadership looks like. As we talked, I realized that Grandma wasn't just supporting me emotionally, she was strategically positioning herself for what she knew was coming. At 83, she still held 10% equity in the family business, and she was already planning how to use it. The financial catastrophe I'd been expecting finally materialized. Helen called me directly this time, her voice tight with concern. Rachel, Drew misfiled an entire quarter of invoices. $50,000 in client payments that can't be tracked down. The bank account doesn't match the books, and your parents are in full panic mode. $50,000. I closed my eyes and felt a mixture of vindication and genuine sadness. That was almost exactly the amount I'd helped them recover through better billing practices 2 years earlier, money that had allowed them to expand their office and hire additional staff. Drew had essentially undone years of careful financial management in a matter of months. They keep asking me if I know where you kept the backup files, Helen continued. I told them you probably took everything with you, but we both know you're too professional for that. She was right. I'd left detailed transition documents and backup systems when I was fired, but apparently no one had bothered to read them or understand how they worked. They'd assumed Drew could figure it out on his own, and now they were paying the price for that assumption. 2 weeks later, I was invited to speak at the Regional Business Solutions Conference, a gathering of consultants and business owners that I'd attended as a participant for 3 years. This time, I was on the agenda as a featured speaker discussing operational excellence in growing companies. As I walked onto the stage, I spotted a familiar face in the audience that made my heart skip a beat. Drew was sitting in the 3rd row, notebook in hand, clearly there as an attendee rather than a speaker. The irony was so perfect it almost made me laugh. The cousin who'd replaced me was now in the audience, taking notes on my presentation about the very skills he'd supposedly been hired to provide. When our eyes met, he choked on his water and quickly looked away. I delivered my presentation with confidence, sharing case studies and methodologies I'd developed through my own consulting work. The audience was engaged and responsive, asking thoughtful questions and requesting my contact information. It felt incredible to be recognized as an expert in my field, to have my knowledge valued and respected by my peers. After years of being overlooked and underestimated by my own family, professional recognition from strangers felt like the sweetest vindication possible. After my presentation, the real magic happened. 3 of my parents' former clients approached me, their faces lighting up with recognition. Rachel, we had no idea you'd started your own firm, said Patricia Walsh from Walsh Manufacturing. That's fantastic. We've been so frustrated with the service we've been getting lately. Marcus Thompson from Thompson Logistics nodded emphatically. The attention to detail just isn't there anymore. We've been considering making a change. By Monday morning, 2 of them had officially canceled their contracts with Evans Consulting and signed with Aeroline Solutions. Patricia's contract alone was worth $30,000 annually, and Marcus brought even more value as a long-term client with complex needs. I should have felt guilty about taking business from my family, but I didn't. These clients had sought me out because they valued competence over family loyalty, results over relationships. They were choosing quality service, and I was simply providing what Drew apparently couldn't. The fact that my own expertise was now directly competing with and beating my family's business felt like the ultimate validation of everything I'd tried to tell them about the importance of operational excellence. The begging began on a Tuesday. Mom called, and there were no fake smiles in her voice this time. Just barely controlled panic. Rachel, your father and I need to talk to you. It's urgent. Can you come by the house tonight? I let the call go to voicemail and listened to it 3 times before responding. For the first time in our relationship, my mother was asking for my help instead of criticizing my performance. The power dynamic had completely shifted, and we both knew it. I texted back, "I'm pretty busy this week. What's this regarding?" She responded immediately, "The business. Please. It's important. Important." The same business I'd supposedly been too plain and predictable to lead was now important enough to warrant an emergency family meeting. I made them wait 2 days before agreeing to meet, not out of cruelty, but because I genuinely was busy with client work. When I finally agreed to come over, I did so on my terms, with my own agenda, and with the confidence that came from knowing I held all the cards in whatever negotiation was about to unfold. They invited me to the house and set up the living room like a job interview, with them sitting across from me as if I were a candidate they were considering. The role reversal was almost comical. "We need your help," Dad said, his voice lacking its usual authority. "You know the systems better than anyone." Drew is struggling with some of the technical aspects. Struggling. That was a diplomatic way to describe financial chaos and client exodus. I let the silence linger, using a negotiation tactic I'd learned from watching my father in business meetings. Finally, I spoke. "I'm listening." They offered me a consulting contract, then a part-time position, then a junior partnership role. Each offer revealed more about their desperation and their continued underestimation of my worth. After each proposal, I simply said no. Finally, when they'd exhausted their list of inadequate offers, I said the words I'd been preparing for months. "I'll consider coming back, but only if I'm in charge. Full operational control, final decision-making authority, and equity that reflects my contribution to saving this company." The silence that followed was deafening. Mom looked like she wanted to scream. Dad stared at his hands. They'd created this situation, and now they had to live with the consequences. They tried to negotiate, offering me limited authority and minority ownership, but I held firm. "This isn't a negotiation," I explained calmly. "I'm not interested in returning as an employee or junior partner. You need someone to save your business, and I'm offering to do that. But I won't do it without the authority to actually fix the problems you've created." The conversation might have ended in stalemate, but Grandma chose that moment to remind everyone about her 10% equity stake. "I vote for Rachel," she announced from her chair in the corner. "She should be in charge. It's what her grandfather would have wanted." Dad looked defeated. The business was hemorrhaging money, clients were leaving, and their reputation was in shambles. He had no choice but to accept my terms. Mom looked furious, but stayed silent, probably calculating whether keeping the business alive under my leadership was preferable to watching it die under Drew's. The vote was unanimous, though Mom's agreement came through gritted teeth. I was officially returning to the family business, but this time as the person in charge. The daughter they deemed too plain and predictable would now be responsible for saving everything they'd nearly destroyed. When I walked back into that office for the first time in 6 months, everything felt different. No one avoided eye contact this time. Staff members nodded respectfully, some even smiled with what looked like relief. I took Drew's desk, the executive office that had once been mine, and began the process of assessing the damage. Drew didn't come in that day. In fact, he'd apparently stopped showing up regularly weeks earlier, leaving the staff to manage themselves while he focused on business development. I spent my first day reviewing financial records, client communications, and operational procedures. The scope of the damage was worse than I'd imagined, but it wasn't insurmountable. The systems I'd built were still there, just neglected and misused. The client relationships could be repaired with consistent attention and professional service. Most importantly, the staff was eager to return to the structured, efficient environment they'd known before Drew's chaotic leadership. As I sat in my old office, now officially mine again, I felt a profound sense of coming home, not to the family that had rejected me, but to the work I'd always been meant to do. I spent 2 intensive weeks cleaning up the mess Drew had created in 6 months. The missing invoices were tracked down and processed. Client communications were restored to professional standards. Financial systems were rebuilt and updated. Staff members started caring again, energized by clear expectations and consistent leadership. Slowly, clients began returning phone calls and expressing renewed confidence in the company's direction. Even the staff seemed relieved to have someone in charge who actually understood the business and cared about doing things right. The transformation was remarkable but not surprising. I'd always known what the company could accomplish with proper leadership and attention to detail. My parents watched these changes with a mixture of gratitude and resentment. They were happy to see their business stabilizing, but they clearly struggled with the reality that their despised daughter was the one making it happen. I didn't gloat or make speeches about proving them wrong. I simply focused on the work, letting results speak louder than any vindication speech ever could. My first official board meeting as CEO was a pivotal moment. I presented a comprehensive recovery plan, complete with financial projections and strategic initiatives for rebuilding client trust. Halfway through my presentation, Mom tried to interrupt with a suggestion that would have undermined everything I was trying to accomplish. For the first time in my life, I held up my hand and said firmly, "I'm not done." The room went silent. Mom's face registered shock. I'd never spoken to her that way before, had never asserted authority over her in any context. But I wasn't the desperate, overlooked daughter anymore. I was the CEO of this company, the person responsible for its survival, and I wouldn't allow anyone to derail the progress we were making. Dad nodded approvingly, recognizing the leadership presence they'd claimed I lacked. Even Mom seemed to understand that the power dynamic had permanently shifted. I finished my presentation without further interruption, and the board approved every recommendation I'd made. The little girl who'd never been allowed to finish a sentence had finally found her voice. 3 months later, the company got a new name that reflected its evolution, Evans Airline Group. I didn't erase the family legacy. Evans represented the foundation my grandfather had built. But Airline represented the direction and precision that would guide us forward. The rebrand was symbolic but also practical, signaling to clients and competitors that we were under new management with renewed focus on excellence. My parents didn't fight the name change, though I could see Mom struggle with the visual reminder that her rejected daughter had not only returned, but was now defining the company's identity. The new logo, the updated website, and the professional marketing materials all reflected the standards I'd always wanted to implement. For the first time in the company's 40-year history, our external image matched the quality of our internal capabilities. Client feedback was overwhelmingly positive, and new business inquiries increased dramatically. We weren't just recovering from Drew's mistakes, we were building something better than what had existed before. Now, my parents wait outside my office to get on my calendar. They schedule meetings with my assistant and present their ideas for my approval, just like any other stakeholders in the company. I don't make them grovel or humiliate them the way they once humiliated me. I'm not petty, and I understand that successful leadership requires grace and professionalism. But I also never forget how they treated me when they had the power, how quickly they abandoned their own daughter when they thought someone else might serve their interests better. The business is thriving under my leadership. We've recovered all the clients Drew lost and gained several new ones. Our reputation in the industry has been restored, and our financial position is stronger than it's ever been. Drew now works at a car dealership across town, apparently having discovered that charisma alone doesn't qualify someone for executive leadership. My parents sign paychecks that I approve, attend meetings that I lead, and watch their daughter implement the vision they'd once deemed her too plain to execute. They pushed me out of the family business, but that rejection forced me to become the leader I was always meant to be. Now they work for me, and every success we achieve is proof that they were wrong about everything that matters. Please let me hear your thoughts in the comment section. Have you ever been underestimated by your own family? Have you ever had to prove yourself to people who should have believed in you from the start? Comment below and share your experiences. And if this story inspired you to believe in your own potential despite other people's limitations, please subscribe to this channel and hit that notification bell. There are more stories of family dynamics, business triumph, and personal vindication coming your way. Thank you for watching.